How often during your day do you wish that the distractions would be a few less than what you're currently experiencing? Whether it's checking your email all the time or looking at your smartphone or just being interrupted throughout your workday. Well, our next guest has something to say about that. Nir Eyal, who is the 2001 Thomas Arkell Clark honoree, initiated as an ATO at Emory University, and since his graduation in 2001, Nir has gone on to start and sell to tech companies, get his advanced business degree from Stanford, and he's currently living in Singapore with his family as a best-selling author and speaker. Nir has written specifically about how technology can help you build good habits in your life, and his second book was about how you can help yourself avoiding distractions. Nir is someone who has thought and written a lot about these issues, and today we're going to have a great conversation about insights that he has learned through his research. I'm Wynn Smiley, and this is the ATO Show. So Nir, thank you for joining us. You're in Singapore, so that's about 12 hours ahead of where we are right now. So it's evening. I appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure.
To join us.
Great to be here. Sure.
Yeah, so I looked at the notes. You won the Thomas Arkell Clark Award in 2001. I could not believe that. Where's the time gone? But since graduating from Emory, you've been on quite a run and quickly getting your advanced degree from Stanford. And then sort of moving in very quickly into the tech business. So sort of now an author and a speaker on issues, tech and human behavior. So give us the 60,000 foot overview from 2001 to today, just in terms of your professional path and how you decided the path that you have chosen.
Sure, yeah. So today I call myself a behavioral designer. So I help companies build the kind of products and services that people use because they want to, not because they have to. So I use my research in behavioral design to build healthy habits. So I've worked with educational companies like Duolingo was a client that used the hook model to get people hooked onto learning a new language. Or Fitbod uses the hook model to get people hooked onto exercise. So the idea behind much of my research has been about how can we use the psychology behind what makes products like Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and TikTok and Slack so habit-forming and sticky. How can we steal their secrets so that the rest of us can build products and services that people love and love to get habituated to for healthy habits? So it's not about getting people hooked to frivolity. It's about stealing those secrets to build habits for good. So that's kind of in my professional life, and now I'm a professional author and speaker. So my clients include any of these type of companies, but I also do a lot of public speaking for the topic of my second book, which is about distraction. So the book is called Indistractable, and it's kind of the flip side of the coin, right? That if Hooked was about how do you build healthy habits, Indistractable is about how do you break bad habits. And so I really want to dive into the psychology of distraction because I kept getting distracted, right? After when I wrote my first book, it was kind of easy because nobody was calling me. Nobody knew who I was. But then once Hook started getting some traction, I started getting invited to speaking engagements and investment opportunities and consulting opportunities. And I started getting distracted from what made me successful in the first place. And so I really wanted to get to the bottom of what is this human phenomenon of distraction and what do we do to overcome it? So that's what I do today.
So Nir, what prompted your interest in this niche? At what point did you say, this is very interesting and I think I'll make a career of it?
Yeah. So I didn't know you could actually do this as a career. I just started. So I started a couple of tech companies. The first one was a solar energy business, and that was very well timed. We sold that to a private equity firm, so that's how I got kind of on my feet. And then I went to business school, and then at business school I started another company that was basically an ad tech business at the intersection of gaming and advertising. And there I had this front row seat of watching my clients and my customers using psychology to get people hooked to all kinds of things, games and social networks, etc. And I had very good timing in that I went to Silicon Valley in 2006 for business school. And that's where I got this front row seat. And so I became fascinated with, wow, how is it that some of my clients, their games explode and they're super successful and millions of users love it, and then others just kind of crash and burn. And so I wanted to figure out their secrets by looking deeper into the psychology of how these products are designed to get people hooked, in hopes that I could take those secrets and use them myself. I thought I wanted to start another company. But what I discovered was that just by blogging about it and sharing what I was learning, I got an email from one of my old professors at Stanford that said, hey, I really like your work. What if we taught a class together? And so he invited me to teach a class at Stanford at the business school. And then later I moved over to the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design. And that kind of started me on this path of doing what I thought was a hobby of researching and writing. It turns out it's a lot of fun. I get paid to learn for a living, which I love, and I get to tackle my own problems. So a lot of authors, they write what they know. That's not my MO. For me, I write what I want to know. And so that's always what motivates me, right? So when I wanted to know how to build habit-forming products, I wrote Hooked. When I wanted to figure out how to become indistractable and control my attention and choose my life, I wrote Indistractable. And so that's always guided me along my path. And it turns out, if you learn something and you study it more than anyone else and you go down an original path, you can kind of become an expert at it just because nobody else has put in the work to know it as well as you do. And so you can kind of become an expert just by marinating in a topic long enough.
So the Hooked, your first book, which was a bestseller on Wall Street Journal's bestseller list, would tend to, if it was successful, which it obviously was, and you spoke to audiences about that, would then prompt people probably, right, to read your second book, which is, oh my gosh, I'm in a habit now that I want to break personally. And so it seems to be a little bit of a yin and yang as it relates to this particular area.
Well, it can be. They definitely rhyme, right? The book covers rhyme. It's definitely meant to rhyme. The idea, though, is that it's not to the same things. So we want to get hooked to the language learning app. We want to get hooked to the fitness product. We want to get hooked to the financial services app that helps us save money. We want to get hooked to healthy habits, but we also want to disconnect and stop getting distracted from the bad habits. So it's two sides of the same coin.
Right. So when you talk to audiences for Indistractable, and I'm assuming that some of your presentations, you have time for audience questions. What are some of the most frequent questions you get about people who want to break bad habits or just are curious about pressing into your expertise on that book?
Yeah, so I think with Indistractable, I think it's important to understand what is distraction, right? It's such a common problem. Everybody seems like they're too distracted from one thing or the other. And today, a lot of that comes from our technologies. And I think the knee-jerk reaction is to blame our devices. You see a lot of people blaming our technology. It's my phone, it's Facebook, it's Twitter, it's all these technologies. And it turns out that distraction is a really old problem. In fact, Plato, the Greek philosopher, talked about distraction 2,500 years ago. He called it in the Greek akrasia, the tendency to do things against our better interest. So if Plato was complaining about this problem 2,500 years ago, the real root cause of the problem can't be the technologies. It's a very lazy answer, I think, to just blame whatever technology. It's what we call a moral panic, because people have always been distracted by one thing or another. Now, if you are looking for distraction, it's easier than ever to find today. But I think that the psychology of distraction and the solution to distraction is much more interesting and much more empowering than just blaming our devices. So frankly, I'll be honest with you, Wynn, I'm sick of these tenured professors telling us stop checking our devices. Well, thanks, stupid. I can't do that. I'm not tenured. I'll get fired from my job if I stop checking email. What kind of impractical solution is that? Or this ridiculous advice, if you want to stay focused, you need to learn how to say no. You're going to tell your boss no? Well, that's a ticket to getting fired. That's ridiculous, right? You're going to tell your wife, no, honey, I'm sorry. I don't want to be distracted by taking out the trash right now. I'm too busy with watching something on TV. No, you can't tell people no in your life. You have to figure out a better way. And so it really starts with our values, right? That really understanding what are your values is where we have to start. So what are values? Values are attributes of the person you want to become. That's where we have to start. So what I say is that we have to understand what is distraction and what is the opposite of distraction. Most people say the opposite of distraction is focus. That is not right. That if you look at the opposite of the word distraction, the opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. Of course it is. Traction and distraction. They're opposites. Both words come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull, and they both end in the same 6-letter word, A-C-T-I-O-N, that spells action, reminding us that distraction is not something that happens to us. It is an action that we ourselves take. So traction, by definition, is any action that pulls you towards what you said you were going to do, things that you do with intent, things that move you closer to your values and help you live the kind of life you know you deserve. So I would argue that any action that you plan to do according to your values and your schedule is fine. We need to stop moralizing and medicalizing these behaviors as if they're sinful for some reason. Why is playing a video game morally inferior to watching sports on TV? What's the difference? They're both pastimes. There's nothing wrong with it. So as opposed to vilifying these behaviors, schedule these behaviors, right? As Dorothy Parker said, the time you plan to waste is not wasted time. So one of the hacks that you can use, that all of us can use, is to turn distraction into traction by putting it on your calendar, by making sure that you're doing whatever it is you want to do. You want to go on social media, you want to watch YouTube videos, whatever it is that you want to do with your time and attention according to your values is fine, as long as it's according to your values and your schedules, not the media companies. So that's traction. Conversely, right, just to finish this point, conversely, anything that is not what you plan to do is distraction. So for me, I would sit down at my desk for years and I would say, okay, I've got that big important project I'm going to work on right now. Nothing's going to get in my way. I'm not going to get distracted. Here I go. I'm going to stay focused. But first, let me check some email, right? How often does that happen to us? Let me just scroll that Slack channel. Let me just check the news. I got to be an updated, informed citizen. I got to do this stuff, right, to stay up to date. Well, if it's not what you said you were going to do in advance, it's just as much of a distraction as playing video games, by definition. So just because it's a work-related task doesn't mean it's not a distraction. In fact, what my research found is that that is the most dangerous kind of distraction because you don't even realize you're off track. Because we justify it saying, oh, it's a work task, so that's why I'm checking email in the middle of the day, even though I said I was going to work on that important project. So this is where we have to start, the difference between traction and distraction. Now, that's two parts of the model. The other two parts is what we call our triggers. Okay, there are two kinds of triggers. We have what we call external triggers. These are the usual suspects, the pings, the dings, the rings, anything in our outside environment that can lead us towards distraction. That's external triggers. Those are the usual suspects. That's what we tend to blame. But it turns out if you look at there's been some fascinating research on this that finds that external triggers are only 10% of our distractions. 10%. What's the other 90%? It turns out 90% of our distractions are not from our phones or this stuff outside of us. 90% of our distractions begin from within. These are called internal triggers. What are internal triggers? Internal triggers are uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape. Boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, anxiety. That is the source of the overwhelming majority of our distractions. So if we're going to beat distraction, we have to master these internal triggers, the source of 90% of our distractions, or we're never going to find our path to becoming indistractable. So now we have a formula. Step number 1, master internal triggers. Step number 2, make time for traction. Step number 3, hack back external triggers. And step number 4, prevent distraction with pacts. And with those 4 strategies, anyone can become indistractible.
It sounds so simple. I have lots of questions based on what you said.
I'll try and be more concise.
No, you're good. You're good. I think this is fascinating because, as you're well aware, right now the conventional wisdom is just about the opposite of everything that you said. Right.
I like to be contrarian.
Yes, right. So I think that we're seeing more, for example, and I'll use several examples here, but right now we're seeing a growing number of school districts prohibiting smartphones or any kind of cell phone from elementary and junior high students in particular, and basically saying they got to be in your locker or in your zipped backpack all day. And if you pull one out during the day, we're going to take it for the rest of the day, and then the disciplines or the punitive nature escalates from there. We're seeing this happen more, I think, this start of the school year than we have in the past. Do you see the value, especially for kids, as it relates to social media and if they have smartphones? As a parent, when your daughter was growing up, did you have concerns about how much she was on her smartphone, if she even was, or did you have rules around that? So that's sort of the first area, kids with smartphones, and how parents are trying to encourage them to not have smartphones or be on their smartphone all the time.
Yeah, no, I'm very much in support of declaring no phone zones, especially when it comes to children, because children are a protected class, right? My 16-year-old daughter can't walk into a bar and order a gin and tonic. She can't go into a casino and start playing blackjack because she's not of sound body and mind under a certain age, which I fully agree with. So not only should we have protections on our devices, which we have COPA compliance, which says that you should not be on social media. It's against the terms of service to be on social media if you're under 13 years old. And I actually quite agree that I don't see why having a phone all day, every day at school is a good idea. I'm all in support of saying let's put those away for kids. They're not helping the school learning environment. So I'm not opposed to that at all. What I am opposed to is this idea that we're not getting to the root cause of the problem here. I should say that what I'm opposed to is saying that the source of the problem is the phones itself. I think the real source of the problem when it comes to overuse, by the way, we know that responsible use of these devices, 3 hours or less, there hasn't been even one study that shows that age-appropriate screen time for kids has any deleterious effects, 3 hours or less. Now, where we start seeing problem is 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day. Now we start seeing problems. And I would argue any form of media, right? When my kid was super into Harry Potter, when she was reading Harry Potter for 6 hours a day, that's too much Harry Potter, right? There's something else going on. So it's about what is it displacing, right? And so what we find is that there's something deeper going on with our kids, which is called the needs displacement hypothesis. That when you look at kids today, they are starved of what we call psychological nutrients. There, you know how we have macronutrients for our bodies? We have protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Well, it turns out, according to self-determination theory, we have these 3 psychological nutrients, which are competency, autonomy, and relatedness. And if you look at these 3 psychological nutrients, I didn't make this up, by the way. This is a 50-year-old theory. It's the most well-supported, well-documented, well-researched explanation for human well-being and flourishing. And what we find is that kids are starving. They don't have the sense of competency, autonomy, and relatedness that kids in past generations had. For example, if you look at the work of Peter Gray, he's found that this is the most over-regulated generation in history. And so this hyper-regulated generation of kids who not only are they hyper-regulated in school, but then as soon as they get out of school, they've got the test prep, and they've got the swimming lessons, and they've got the ballet, and they've got the Mandarin, and they're so hyper-scheduled. Or what do parents do? The media has convinced them that the world is such a dangerous place that parents lock their kids up indoors all day. And so what do they do when they're indoors? Well, they play video games, because what the heck else are they going to do? So what we need to bring back is what's called free play. We need time for kids to nourish themselves with competency, autonomy, relatedness that comes from playing with each other in the real world. And that starts with parents finding other parents who believe in this philosophy of letting kids be kids. We need to stop over-regulating and over-scheduling and let kids play. And what we find is when kids have enough of these psychological nutrients, they don't look for the stuff they're not getting offline by going online, because they're getting it in the real world. And so that's the deeper cause of the problem. But I think, to answer your question, in specific circumstances, sure, I think no phone zones are great. So in my family, for example, the dinner table is a no phone zone, right? We know that kids that eat with their families have lower rates of eating disorders. They have lower rates of depression, anxiety. Their mental health is way better just by that act of eating together as a family. So I'm all for declaring no phone zones. One of the most important no phone zones is the bedroom. That I think this goes for adults and for kids. Anything that interrupts sleep, anything that beeps, buzzes, or boops in the night does not have a place in the kid's room, does not have a place in an adult's room, including a television set, right? Anything that can disrupt sleep should not be in the bedroom. And so that's where we need to declare these no phone zones, where they just don't add to our experience.
So for college students, for ATOs in particular, who may be listening to this, and adults who are listening to this, going back to some things you said a few minutes ago, saying, "Oh, I'm going to really work on this project today, but first I'm going to check my email." Right. So, and everyone understands that distraction blows up your day. Right. If every time in your brain you say, "Oh, I've got to check this," because we really can't multitask. So the question then is, how is an adult or a college student learn the discipline to stay focused, to not check the email? Because I think that's probably the biggest temptation throughout the workday, is to just, if I don't, I need to see what's happening in my email. What are the insights to say, you know what, I'm going to work to develop a habit to not get into that temptation?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we need to start with the fact that this is not easy. So I sometimes get the objection of, well, this sounds like work. And of course, my response is like,
Right.
duh, everything worth having in life is on the other side of work, right? You want to be healthy, you want to be in shape. Guess what? You have to go to the gym and eat right. That's not easy. It's much easier to just eat French fries all day and chocolate milkshakes. If you want to have a great relationship with the people you love, well, that takes effort, right? I've been married now for 23 years. That takes work, right? It didn't come easily. These things aren't happening to you. They're happening for you. Discomfort is a gift. It's telling you you are perfecting a rare skill. And so the difference, what's happening today, is that there is a bifurcation of people. There's a bifurcation of people between people who say, whatever happens, happens, right? Oh, I'm so distracted. Whatever's happening in the news, whatever's happening on Twitter, whatever's happening on YouTube, I can't control it. And people who say, no. I will decide how I control my time and attention because I am indistractable. The title, it's meant to sound like indestructible. It's who you are. It's a superpower. It's a skill. And so how do you do this? It starts, first and foremost, by mastering internal triggers. The sticky truth is that if you can't sit down with your friends or your family for 5 minutes to have lunch or to have a coffee together without checking your phone, it ain't the darn phone. That is not the problem. The problem is that you don't know how to deal with these sensations, these uncomfortable feelings of boredom, loneliness, fatigue. And it's not your fault, right? It's not your fault. You didn't invent social media. You didn't invent email. It's not your fault. But it is your responsibility. Because who else's responsibility could it possibly be? We're going to wait for Zuckerberg to fix this problem? We're going to wait for the geniuses in Washington to fix this problem? If you hold your breath, you're going to suffocate. We have to do something about this. We have to take responsibility for this stuff by having a plan in place so that when you feel bored, when you feel lonely, when you feel uncertain, which everybody feels, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to deal with that discomfort and use it to propel you towards traction? Or are you going to try and escape it with distraction, with a drink or a scroll or a click or a smoke? That's what distractible people do. They try and escape that uncomfortable sensation. But that is step number one. You need to have a plan in place so that when you feel the discomfort, when you feel the emotional itch, the urge to get distracted, you know what to do with it. And this is something I had to learn, right? I've written 2 bestsellers. I've written hundreds of articles. I've been published in the New York Times and the Atlantic. Every time I sit down to write, all I want to do is anything but the writing. It's really hard. So I had to have a set of tools at my disposal, and there's over a dozen of them in the book, that I use every time I feel the urge to get distracted. I know what to do with that urge. I don't try and escape it with distraction. I lean into it to propel me towards traction. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is making time for traction. So what we find is that high performers, they don't just spontaneously go about their day. They make a time box calendar, meaning they plan out what they're going to do and when they're going to do it. They, literally have to sit down and say, what do I want to do with my time? So that's all about turning your values into time. And I talk about these 3 life domains of taking care of yourself, your relationships, and finally your work, and how you can schedule that time so that you finally know what is the difference between traction, what you said you would do, and everything else, which is a distraction. Because remember, you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. I'll say it again. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So if you have a big open calendar, everything's a distraction. What did you get distracted from exactly? So you have to plan your day. Third is to hack back these external triggers. So I can teach anyone in about 5 minutes to turn their phone into an indistractable phone. That's pretty easy. But what about the meetings that didn't need to be called, the emails that didn't need to be sent and received? So we have to hack back each and every one of those external triggers. I show people exactly how to do that. And then finally, preventing distraction with pacts, which is where we have a firewall, where we have a last line of defense against these distractions. We make these pacts, and there's different kinds of pacts we can discuss. And it's by using those 4 strategies in concert, this is how anybody can become indistractable.
Yeah. And so do you sense that a good percentage of people that try this are getting some traction, to use your vernacular? Or is this something that people start like New Year's resolutions, right? January 1 through 10, you are on board, going like crazy. And then as life sort of envelops you, it's easier to forget. I guess the question is, what would you say to a person who is listening to you or reading your book? Okay, I want to do this. Okay, you need to give yourself X amount of weeks, months, consistently practicing this, before you develop the habit that makes it easier to continue to engage it.
Well, it's much easier than that, and actually, we start with 1 day, because there's a word that I really don't like to use, which you said, which is habit. We rely too much on habits. What do I mean by that? Habit, by definition, is the impulse to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. And unfortunately, the self-help industry has sold us this idea that we can turn anything into a habit, right? A habit, the way people talk about it, is what they want to have done but don't like doing. I hate exercise, so let me turn it into a habit so I will have done it. I hate writing, but I know I need to, so let me turn it into a habit so it will get done, kind of with this magic autopilot button. Where is this magic autopilot button?
More like a routine.
A routine. Now we're talking. So a routine is defined as a series of behaviors frequently repeated. But the methodology is completely different. Because with a habit, it's all about making it something that's done with little or no conscious thought, which we certainly can do, right? When you learn to drive a car, at first, you're white-knuckling it. But then when you turn into a habit, you can talk on the phone while you're driving. You can listen to the radio. You can do all kinds of other things because you're driving with little or no conscious thought. But hard behaviors, right? Starting a business, writing a book, exercising, getting in shape, these things require effort. So the methodology is completely different because now we have to deal with these uncomfortable sensations. So the step is actually super easy. All you got to do is to plan tomorrow. Just plan tomorrow using these 4 principles. If you can just do one small thing from each of these 4 strategies, master internal triggers, know what you will do when you feel uncomfortable, when you feel bored. Do you try and escape that boredom with, I need to watch something on YouTube, I need to read the news, I need to worry about somebody's problems thousands of miles away so I can escape this discomfort? Or do you know how to use it? What high performers do, they use that discomfort to propel them towards traction. So you need to have that plan in place. Planning out 1 day. Like, so few people have actually experienced the bliss, the joy of doing what they said they would do, as opposed to what everybody around them says they should do. So sitting down and planning out not what you will finish. This is a big one. One of the worst things you can do for your personal productivity is use a to-do list to manage your day. One of the worst things you can do. There's very scant evidence in the psychological literature around to-do lists being effective. They're really not effective because if you run your day on a to-do list, here's what happens. You wake up in the morning, you look at that to-do list. Do you do the important thing? No. You know what people do? They do the fun task. They do the urgent task, right? Not the stuff that actually is important in their work. So much better way than using a to-do list, but running your life on a to-do list, is to run your life based on a calendar. And stop measuring yourself by how many cute little boxes you check off. This is what I used to do all the time. I would actually, I'm embarrassed to admit it to you, I would finish a task, and then I would go back to my to-do list and write it in so I could get the joy of checking it off. How stupid is that, right? That makes no sense. Rather, a much better way to do things is to plan out how long you will work on a task without distraction. That's it. So if you're a college student, how long are you going to study for that test? 30 minutes. You don't have to finish studying for the test. It's how long you work on the task without distraction. Why is that so important? Because that is the only way that you can give yourself feedback for how long things take. A to-do list is just a register of things you want to have finished, right? It's output. Where's the input? The input is your time. So you have to register that input. So here's what happens. You work on a task, like let's say I'm going to give a talk at a big conference and I've got to deliver a slide presentation of 30 slides. Okay, I put in a time box in my calendar to work on that task for 30 minutes. I don't care if I finish. The goal is not to finish. I work on the task for 30 minutes. And then if I did it without distraction, I can look at the clock and say, okay, well, in 30 minutes, I finished about 3 slides. That means I need 9 more time boxes to finish the entire job. And that's the only way that you can get feedback to know how long things take. So and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole lot of other techniques I talk about in the book, but those are just a few that have really made a huge impact in my life.
That's great. So, given the nature of this particular podcast, Nir, we need to talk a little bit about ATO and your ATO experience at Emory and how that experience impacted you as you were going through Emory, and if it's still having impact, residual impact today and through your profession.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that ATO gave me is this brotherhood with a house of guys that whenever I had a crazy idea and I wanted to try something, I had the support of 100-something guys helping me out. So for me, a big part of my experience at Emory was starting nonprofits. So I started a nonprofit called Emory Read, which is still there today, which sent college students into inner city schools to help teach kids how to read. And when I started that, a huge reason that project succeeded was that I had a bunch of guys who wanted to join the program and were supporting me in it. And so that was amazing. So just having the firepower to have an army of guys rooting for you was amazing. And so that was a huge part of my experience.
I tell undergraduates all the time, look, there is never going to probably be another time in your life where you are surrounded by guys who you can take risks. And if you wanted to try something, you have a support group that will be in your corner, cheering you along as long as they know what you're trying to do, and take advantage of that, right? Use that brotherhood to take, we were talking about earlier, take risks on campus, try something new, do something. A lot of times chapters, being a part of ATO will open or present doors that you wouldn't even be aware of on campus or in the community had you not joined the chapter, and take advantage of those because you've got a support group that is unique at this time in your life and probably will not replicate itself in any other time in your life.
So true. So true. And I think that another really important point, we know that men, I didn't realize this when I was at Emory, but growing up now that I'm 46 years old and looking at the data around how dangerous loneliness is, particularly for men, that we know that loneliness is as detrimental to your health as from a statistical standpoint as smoking and obesity. And particularly when it comes to men, we know that men have fewer strong social connections. So, the investment you're making in this brotherhood, it's not just about your college experience. I think people think about fraternities are a college thing. It's really not, right? You're only in college for 4 years. But to have those lifelong friends, the people who will be at your wedding, as many of my brothers were at my wedding, the people whose weddings you will go to, the people whose christenings and bar mitzvahs of their kids, and eventually maybe funerals, that is so important, and we really undervalue that. And what you will find, I think, if you're listening and you're in this college age, what you will find is that it never happens again. I hate to say it, but there is just no time like college where you form the same type of relationships. It just doesn't exist after college. There's no place to build those kind of lifelong friendships. So take advantage of it while you can.
Yeah, are you familiar with Richard Reeves? Nir, he was part of the Brookings Institute, and then he raised 3 sons who are all adults now. But he had observed that his boys growing up were not being encouraged in school and were not given the kinds of things that he got growing up as a boy. And so he became so concerned about it that he started his own think tank, left Brookings, and is focusing on this issue, one of them being the loneliness factor with men. And I've had the chance to have dinner with him, have heard him at a conference, and he's very interested, was not familiar really with fraternity prior to us meeting, but is very interested in what fraternity can bring in this area of connection and fighting loneliness and improving mental health, just being part of this community.
So true. It's such important work, and it I feel like when Neil Postman wrote about this in his book Bowling Alone, about these institutions that I think our fathers and grandfathers had. Right, they had the Kiwanis Club, they had the bowling league. Well, now those organizations, like, they don't exist for my generation. They're not. People aren't participating in them like they used to. And this isn't a social media problem. This isn't new. This is Putnam wrote that in 1990s. But the problem has only gotten worse. So, it just makes it even more important to have those early relationships that then you can foster and nurture throughout your life.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Nir, are you, a couple of things. Number one, if people want to get in touch with you or want to learn more about your book, I'll ask you that in a second. But just overall, are you encouraged with what you see now, not only in tech, but just in terms of how people are responding to your books and just your general observation of where we are today in the tech land and how we're interacting? Are you encouraged, or are you just like, man, this is a tough road?
Oh, I'm very optimistic. I think we have to remember that that neurologically we have what's called a negativity bias. Evolutionarily, things that were dangerous killed you, while things that nourished you were nice. Right, so we all have this negativity bias. It's inborn in us, and so that's why the news media stays in business. If it bleeds, it leads. Right, the news media's job is not to tell you an accurate portrayal of reality. They tell you about sensationalism, right? They tell you about wars that have nothing to do with you. They tell you about, freak accidents that have nothing to do with you, because that's what people tune into. And so I think it's the same way when it comes to technology. I think by and large, we are so fortunate, right? Like, this is such a great time to be alive. Unfortunately, the problem is most people don't realize that fact. I mean, if everyone can go out and get this book, Factfulness by Hans Rosling, it's such a great book. Basically, he did a survey of college professors, the most educated people in society, and he asked them simple questions, multiple choice, on the state of the world. The state of the environment, female education, democracy, the economy, all these questions about the state of the world. And it turns out that these college professors did worse than monkeys. Meaning, had these professors, had they done
they appreciated
a
that.
random chance, like pure random chance, they would have. These professors scored worse than random chance, because they thought the world was so much worse than it actually is. So, fantastic book, Hans Rosling. His book is called Factfulness, and so I'm super optimistic. Now, does that mean that there aren't problems with technology? Of course not. There's a wonderful saying. Paul Virilio said, "When you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck." Okay, you can't have shipwrecks without ships. And so, of course, when you create something as vast and as powerful and as world-changing as the internet, there are going to be shipwrecks. But what did we do? Did we stop sailing ships? No, we made ships better. And that's exactly what we've been doing. When was the last time we heard of a shipwreck? It's pretty rare. It's not because we don't sail ships. It's because we continue to improve them. And that's exactly what's happening with technology. And so we need more people not to be scared of technology, but to get into technology so that they can make the last generation of technology better with the next generation. So I'm very optimistic.
Great, Nir. If someone wants to reach out and contact you, how do they do that? Can they do that? And again,
Sure.
Your book, I'm sure, is available everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is called nirandfar.com. Nir spelled like my first name, so that's Nir and far.com. And my latest book is called Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life, and it's available wherever books are sold.
Nir, thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate your insight. And hopefully we will stay in touch.
My pleasure. Thanks so much. Love and respect.
Love and respect.